Denzel Boston is back in action.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Lars, we got a really fun show coming out all the everydayers today, but just a quick reminder, wherever you get your podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure you click that subscribe button, click that little bell down below. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, we're just getting back from Thursday's edition of fall practice. I've already lost track of whatever number it might be at this point. I think it's 13, not 100% sure, but we're getting there. So we got a whole bunch of notes that we want to get to from Thursday's practice. We want to talk about how comfortable we feel with Washington's offensive line, because Denzel Boston made his return to practice in a full capacity today, taking part in a couple of the different team periods. He was still not doing a whole bunch, but as he told us the other day, he feels that he wants to be healthy and ready for the start of the season more than anything else. And it posed a question, Lars, can Washington have a top 3 passing offense in the Big Ten this season?
I know it sounds crazy, but I think the answer is yes. When you look at its best, at Denzel Boston's best, and what we've seen from Demond Williams just in sprinkles, absolutely those two can have a connection, but it goes beyond just Denzel. I mean, obviously Denzel is the star attraction, but from what we saw today, like Rashid Williams, Omari Evans, everybody's kind of making plays, and you have Decker DeGraff. So no matter where you end up getting the production from, I absolutely would agree that top 3, I mean, maybe even top 2 if you really want to push it.
So yeah, top 2 is certainly right there. We went with top 3 because the numbers really back this up. Washington threw for 261.7 yards per game last season with a combination of Will Rogers and Demond Williams at the helm. Maryland finished top at number 3 with 275.7. So that's an additional 14 yards that you need to find per game. And that's something that, we talked about last week when we talked about the total yardage and the scoring, and how having Demond Williams and just so much more talent on offense with another year to build everything that Jedd Fisch wants to do can really benefit this program as a whole. We want to talk about that with the offensive line. I'm really glad you highlighted some of these other receivers, Rashid Williams, who just continues to look really, really good at practice, as well as Omari Evans and Decker DeGraff, and some of these other guys as well who are stepping up and making plays. Kevin Green, Justice Williams, Audric Harris, whoever else it might be. There are wide receivers or tight ends every single day making big plays for Demond Williams, who after the last couple of days, he hadn't necessarily been as accurate as we've just kind of gotten used to seeing from him. But that was something that he put on the back burner today. You and I and our good buddy Alex Katzen were kind of standing there, and Alex said something where they ran a bootleg play out to Demond's left, and he made a really nice throw. I believe that one was to Quentin Moore for like a 10, 15-yard gain. And Alex said, they really love running that play, don't they? And it's something where, we all just kind of agreed, yeah, we've seen it a lot over the course of fall practice, and it's not just a way to get Demond, who is one of the more athletic quarterbacks in the country, into space so he can be a dual threat where he has the ability to pull the ball down and run it if need be, but he can also beat you over the top with his accuracy that allowed him to complete 78% of his passes last season. Now, we're not saying that that's what we expect him to do for the entirety of the sophomore year. That seems a little bit unfair. But with all the playmakers around him and with what we know he's going to bring to the table, combined with what we know Jedd Fisch is going to do for him, it feels within the realm of expectations that Washington's offense can find an extra 14 yards per game through the air.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about that, that's probably 3 to 5 plays at max, per game in terms of when you expand everything out. And you look at, all the other changes that have been made to the program, getting the offense one more possession on special teams, the defense being suffocating, which I do think, I'm not saying it's totally been why Demond has been struggling, but I think there's some credit, going out to, the defensive backs as well, kind of making things harder. Obviously, the, defensive line's been getting a push. So I think it's good for Demond to kind of have some of these struggles in camp, knowing that we've never really seen Demond make the same mistake twice. And we have seen him make the same play time and time again in terms of the right decision and things like that. But I love the fact that you're pointing out the high percentage throws that Demond can make. I think those are the things that allow him to get in rhythm. And we've seen kind of in times when he has struggled like he did a little bit today, he hasn't been able to find that rhythm. He's 0-1, 0-2. And so I think Jedd kind of knows how to get him going, especially going into year 2.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a big part of this. And it's something I talked about on yesterday's show, where it's what makes him such a really exciting weapon in the world of college football is you find ways to get him in rhythm. And it's not always with his arm, it's with his legs as well. It's when you use him on zone reads and different things like that, where he can just use his athleticism, pick up 5, 6, 7 yards, and just get back into the flow of the game. That's something that really just can't go understated. And we should probably talk a little bit more about Denzel Boston. When you have a guy like that, who is an alpha wide receiver, a top 3 at worst, in my opinion, receiver in the Big Ten as of right now, like that's something that just helps this offense out a lot, because we've seen what it looks like without him, where Jedd Fisch has put a really nice just scheme out there on the field. But having a guy like that, who's going to command extra attention no matter what level of the field he's at, does change so much of this offense, and it's going to open things up for Rashid Williams, Omari Evans, Decker DeGraff, all these names that we've already run through. And that's something where there's still probably going to be big plans to try to get Denzel over 1,000 yards and over that 10 touchdown marker as well.
And it's not crazy to think that either, because you might think, well, if he's getting double, triple covered, safety over the top plus the outside cornerback, maybe it'll be hard for him to get to 1,000 yards. And I think when you look at just kind of the way this offense is designed, whether it's about kind of creating those one-on-one matchups and creating those mismatches for, guys like Decker DeGraff over the middle and Audric Harris or Rashid Williams in the slot, for example, where if Omari's the guy taking the top off either in the slot or outside, you have at least 1 or 2 guys that are going to be open, where we've seen Jedd use that kind of tight end receiver combo to say, whether it's Quentin Moore, Kevin Green, no matter who it is, there always seems to be somebody open in this offense. It's just a matter of, can you call the right play at the right time?
And that's something that I think is going to change as we see the 2025 season come to fruition, because it is a big question. And I've spent some time talking about it on this show, is can Jedd Fisch get the play calling right? Where there were too many different points last year where it was, okay, yeah, this is a questionable play call. That's a questionable play call. We don't need to go through some of the obvious ones, but there were so many other different points where it's, I don't know why that ended up being the play call with, this offensive line. And this is what you were doing there with Will Rogers at quarterback, who doesn't necessarily just have the same skill set as Demond. And I think that that's something it's very hard to see when we're going through spring and fall practice and the only team you're playing is, a coach that you've been working with for, 10, 12 hours a day for the last 6, 7 months. But I think that's one thing where, as we just kind of see this season roll on, I bet there's still going to be a couple of moments, as there are in any football season, where we're going to sit here and say, well, why was this the call? Why was that the call? But not nearly as many as we did last season, which is another reason why you and I are so high on what this team can be going into the 2025 season. We believe that everybody around this program has learned from some of the mistakes that they've made over the last season, even during their time at Arizona, where I know people were on Jedd for his play calling at the double overtime game, or triple, maybe it was, at Arizona USC. Like, there were so many different moments where that has been a big issue in terms of Jedd taking the next step. But it feels like with a guy like Demond and what this passing offense in its totality can give to you, is something that might help him get over the hump.
And I think we've also seen, despite Demond having struggled at times during camp, when he makes those mistakes and kind of it's either a bad read, an underthrown ball, what have you, it's still not detrimental to the point of, okay, that was a really bad decision in terms of I didn't see the guy over, whatever. It'll kind of just be, not even a fluke play, but just kind of a combination of good read by the defender. Maybe you could have put it a little bit further, a little bit closer, things like that. But he's not really missing in bad areas. And so I think when you combine the decision-making of Demond and the play calling of Jedd and being improved, both of those things are going to be improved going into the season. I think that's why there's going to be so much. We both feel there's going to be so much success, because you're marrying the two kind of perfect worlds together.
Lars, you made a whole bunch of great points there, but none of this works if the offensive line doesn't work. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at Wayfair. As summer winds down, there's something nice about getting back into a routine you love. And Wayfair makes it easy to set yourself up for the season ahead. From beddings and linens to storage solutions for every room, Wayfair is your one-stop shop to refresh your home. I recently picked up a new couch for my living room out there from Wayfair, and it's been the perfect addition to the home. I love how it fits the style and just the room in general. It's been a really nice way to refresh my whole space, especially when I'm sitting out there playing my video games. Get organized, refresh, and batch routine for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Lars, let's start with this because this was a phenomenal question we got from one of our insiders a few weeks ago. And we're going to give more answers like this as we get closer to the end of fall camp. But the question was, can you grade each position group in terms of comfortability from 1 to 10? So that's what we're going to do with the offensive line right now, where we've seen some rotations. We've kind of gotten the grander picture of what this is going to look like. There's still a few questions that we have, but 1 to 10, how comfortable are you with this offensive line right now?
At 7 trending towards 8. I think where it's certainly stable, certainly better than last season, but you're still talking about potentially 2 inexperienced guys, and really arguably 3 with Paki Finau, just because he hasn't had a full season, kind of like Drew Azzopardi did last season, where he, as Jedd Fisch pointed out on Thursday on KJR, Drew Azzopardi was their most veteran, transfer tackle, and he only played 4 games at San Diego State. Of course, started 4 games at San Diego State. So it's, that's a big jump to go from that to the Big Ten. It's big for Paki to go from, playing in spot starts, getting the Sun Bowl opportunity, to doing it week in, week out, and especially in the Big Ten Conference. But I think what we've seen in camp shows it could work, but you still just really want to see it against somebody else, like we kind of talked about, which until at least August 30th, we won't get to see.
So I like where you're starting there, because I'm between a 6 and a 7. And the biggest reason for me right now is just the fact that this team is so unsure about the interior of the line. And I want to turn that into a positive, because I feel like there's a lot to like about that position as well. But I look at it right now, and, we saw Zach Henning take a couple of first team snaps at right guard today, but it's mainly been Gear and Hatchet. It was really nice to see that he did avoid a major knee injury after what happened in the scrimmage, because he's been practicing fully since then. But I look at left guard, and this rotation of Paki Finau and John Mills, I think there's a lot of talent there, and I'm really excited about that. But I want to talk about that in a second, because as of right now, we still don't know who the starting left guard is going to be, because the reps have been 50-50. Like, truly, they have been for the entirety of fall camp, which I think speaks to not only the talent that both players have, because we know how much both coaching staffs loved Paki Finau. We know how high this coaching staff was on John Mills, like even when he was committed to Texas, and how much they wanted to make sure that they ended up with his commitment at the end of the day. And they did that. They got his signature. And I look at both those guys, and I think that they're going to want to get both of them on the field in some way, shape, or form, which could lead to some rotation early on. That's where I'm kind of closer to a 6 right now, because I think the talent, especially with Carver Willis, who's looked rock solid at left tackle, I think the talent is so much improved. But I'm just a little curious to see how this is going to play out in terms of just how they're divvying up the snaps and different things like that once we get into a live game, because if it's John or Paki full-time, I think you're happy with that. If it is a combination of those guys, I think you're happy with that by week 3, week 4, maybe. But there could be some questions early and a couple of breakdowns where it's a John series, and not necessarily blaming either of those guys for what's going on. But so much of offensive line play is about cohesiveness. And if you're rotating guys there, it's great that you like the talent, but I think there are still things that you need to have figured out at that position.
The depth is great, but continuity is greater. And I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head there, where I would say going into the Wazoo game, you should know who your starting 5 is, barring an injury between now and then. And I think for me, I could see a world where Paki certainly gets the starts, and then John just kind of sees his time when he sees his time. And if Paki maybe struggles, let's say, against Wazoo or against Ohio State, I guarantee you, Jedd won't be shy about putting John Mills in that game. My thing is going to be, I could see it where Paki starts the season over against Colorado State, John Mills gets to start against UC Davis the week later, and they both still play an equal number of reps at the end of the day. And maybe they try Paki at right guard and see where Champ is and Paki is at that position, even though we haven't seen a ton of him there. I can just see, again, it's UC Davis, so you should be able to win that game no matter where Paki Finau is starting and lining up along the offensive line. But with that being said, those are the 2 real games that you have to play chess, and then you got to figure out where your board looks like going into the Wazoo game.
And one thing that I don't think we did a good job of noting a few weeks ago when we were talking about some of these games is you have a bye week before the Apple Cup, which is an important part of this because it lets you just continue to figure that out. And I think that's something that can't necessarily go understated because it helps with so many of these things as these competitions continue to play out. And I mean, as the football season goes, guys are going to get nicked up at different points in time. You never know what it's going to look like. Obviously, you never hope for anything along those lines, but it's something that does happen. And I think that was one of the things that we kind of saw play out with the Guerin injury. And again, it's wonderful that he's returned to the field, but we saw Paki kick over to right guard, and that was just something that was so beneficial and speaks to the depth of this unit compared to what it was last year. And it's why we're so much higher just in terms of confidence level than we were at any point coming into last season, because there's just so much extra talent here. And even Paki, you talk about him getting into a couple of games last year. The fact that he's just simply able to be a part of the mix now after being a little bit underweight as a true freshman last year is great. And that speaks to the depth. Champ, where he is in his development. Zach Henning playing both center and guard. It's wonderful to have those kinds of guys where Maximus McCree, Sawane Fasolo had a really nice pancake block today that got his teammates really fired up as they were going into the end zone there. There are so many just different little things where I think, if we get into the tackle situation, John Mills is going to be part of that discussion too, if you do need to find a long-term solution at that position. But I just look at where the line is right now, and I think it's going to be just so much better than it was last season. And we're not saying it's going to go from 18th in the Big Ten in sacks allowed to top 3, top 5. But if you go to 18 to even just say 10 to 11, which is slightly below average, you're going to be more than happy with that because it shows a ton of progression. And it shows that the talent is there to continue building for 2026 when a lot of these guys are going to be a year older. Plus, I mean, we'll see how much he plays and what that looks like. You have one of the top 3 offensive tackles in the nation coming in from the high school ranks.
And also worth kind of as a reminder to tie into the first segment, you do have Damon Williams, who probably should have a little bit more awareness, maybe throw away some of those plays that could have been sacks, and that's how you knock that number down as well. And so I think it all factors together where Damon is clearly taking ownership of this offense, where you see just the way that he commands the huddle, everything's set up. They only had a couple of procedural issues in that first scrimmage, but ever since then, we haven't really seen a ton of that in fall camp. So I think it's good to see that Damon clearly has his, has the no pun intended range of the offense. And I think it's just a matter of can it all come together quick enough, because you should probably be 3-0 in non-conference play, all things considered here. And then you get kind of hit in the mouth with Ohio State, and then you go to Maryland, and, then the real test starts to, kind of come down the line. That's where, that's why I kind of emphasize the Wazoo game. And I'm glad you made the point about the bye week, because you can experiment so much, but you want that continuity. And I think it's kind of important to harp on that, because we've seen at times, previous staffs make a few changes mid-game, and it takes guys time to acclimate. And I think it's why having Guerin Hatchett as a guy who kind of is like a 6th alignment / going to be a starter at right guard, but really is kind of that guy that could kind of go a couple of different ways. And same with Max McCree. Those were 2 guys where maybe last season you're viewing them as, hey, if these guys aren't, holding up the job, we might be in trouble here. Now
they were viewed as like saviors. Like Max last season, like Drew last season as well, like you mentioned a few minutes ago.
Exactly. And so to me, now the fact that Drew's another year older, and I think he's looked better in fall camp, and you look at Landon being able to be fully healthy now, and really, again, that relationship between the center quarterback exchange, all those, I think you're talking about an underrated veteran center and a budding veteran in Damon Williams, even though you can't call him a veteran yet because he isn't starting more than 2 games. But he just has that aura about him where I'm not really worried about him kind of getting panicked and maybe losing control of his unit. I think like the guys are really galvanizing around him, and that's something to factor in as well.
No, I like where you're going with that. When you said continuity, the entire time you were talking, you made a whole bunch of great points. I was just thinking in my head, Carver Willis, because that's where so much of this starts, on the quarterback's blind side. And it was something I've been really impressed with Carver whenever we get a chance to talk to him as well. But it was something that he mentioned in the spring was not feeling totally comfortable with the position yet. That was something where he spoke to us at Media Day. He's spoken to us again since then and said over the summer, he found ways to get that right, working on the biomechanics and just some of the different things that come along with playing on the other side of the offensive line. And the more I watch him, no matter who he's going up against, if, they stun a defensive tackle around, and Ontario Thompson, I'm just making an example there, we haven't seen much of that, Tacario Davis or Zach Durfee, whoever is in his path, he's done a really good job of keeping a steady, clean pocket on Damon's blind side. And that's something where as the season goes on, if that continues, if he does hold up and plays at the level he did on the right side last year, which is all Big 12 honorable mention. Actually, that was 2023. But still, the point stands that he has that kind of potential of all conference kind of player. If he can continue to do that in 2025 while playing on the other side of the line, that's such a massive boost for this group, because that's something we didn't see last year. We saw 3 different left tackles last season. Sawane Fasolo, Kaylee Tafai, and Max McCree. And they all struggled in their own right to some degree. And that's something where, again, to tie this all together, if you get more consistent play from the most important position on the offensive line, then all of a sudden everything else is going to take a big step forward. And we're really excited to see how that's going to look. And Lars, there was a lot to be excited about on the practice field on Thursday. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. You can take a flyer on the MVP race. For me, for Husky fans out there, why not check out Michael Penix? If he leads the Falcons to an NFC South division title, hey, those odds, they're looking phenomenal right now. You can also crown your champion in August. For me, right now, I'd have to go with the Buffalo Bills. I love what Josh Allen is doing and what that whole roster looks like right now. If they can figure out a few injury issues and stay healthy, they are a great bet. You can go check out all those odds and so more over on FanDuel. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. Lars, what stood out to you on the practice field today?
You mentioned Denzel Boston being back, and that's great and all that, but he didn't have the best catch or even the best second catch of the day. I think it went to Rashid Williams and Justice Williams, the Williams team, if you will. Justice had one. I don't know who was against. Maybe you have it in your notes, but he kind of high pointed the ball, went over the defensive back's cornerback's kind of helmet and snagged the touchdown. The touchdown.
That was Ramon's Adams.
Ramon's Adams, no slight at 6'1", 6'2".
He's 6'1", yeah.
And
he's really long too. He's got really long arms.
Exactly. That's why I kind of said 6'2". I'm like, if you told me 6'2", 6'3", I'd believe it from far away. But that was a play that stood out to me. And then Rashid Williams, I remember talking to you about it, where when we were out of practice, I'm like, that's a glue catch. That's just a straight up, like the ball almost kind of just suctioned into Rashid's hands as he was going over the middle of the end zone for a touchdown. And it's those type of guys where more so Rashid that we're going to see this season, we both expect, but Justice as well. Like, he's got the frame to do it, where if you can start to develop those guys and the depth in that room, the potential, and I know we all kind of hate to use that word potential, but it's real. Like, there is so much depth in that receiver room. It's an abundance.
So let's talk about Justice for a second. I know we do that a lot. The everydayers know this. Desmond Roebuck was not at practice today. He was injured, as was Tacario Davis. We didn't see either of those guys. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a long-term thing for either of them. Rashawn Clark was back on the field today, just to give a quick injury update, because those are always important. I know people are looking for him. John Richardson said Tacario Davis is fine, by the way. We don't expect that to be anything long-term as of this point in time. But I think that those are all things that are important to mention, especially Desmond Roebuck, because we've seen Justice get opportunities throughout fall camp. We've seen him get a couple of first team snaps when, they go to a 4 or a 5 wide set, but mainly working with the second team. And that was something today. And you and I, we've had our various conversations with our good friends in the Seattle media on the sidelines of practice. And, there are a couple ones that I know you and I have had over the last couple of weeks of practice where some people have said to me I was a little, I don't want to say concerned, but a little curious on what kind of production Justice would bring to the table and if he could turn into a contributor, after not playing his entire freshman season with the injury that he had that was suffered in high school, which forced him to miss the entirety of – I don't think we saw him at all during fall camp last year. And it was just something where there were so many questions surrounding him. And it's still weird because, you and I are sitting here 2 weeks away from the start of the 2025 season, and we're talking about a guy who we probably won't see get consistent reps until 2026, and still saying, yeah, there's a lot to like about this player. But I think it also just speaks to something that we've talked about for a while now that has just become a recurring theme of watching fall camp is this is not a team where I think it was a little bit more obvious in 2023 where there was still a lot to like about, what the team was going to be moving forward before, the transfer portal stuff happened with Kalen leaving. But there is so much about this team right now that you look at, and you can look at every position on the roster and say, oh, Washington is set up for success at running back with the next 2 to 3 years because of Adam Muhammad. Quade Carr has also looked really, really good in some of these practices. Washington is set up really well at cornerback because John Richardson just had such high praise for Dylan Robinson today. And Leroy Bryant's going to be around for another couple of years as well. Safety with Rylon Dillard-Allen. You can do that at every single position. And I think justice is one of those main talking points at wide receiver where it's, hey, you're losing, a 6'3", 6'4" guy who can really run on the outside in Denzel Boston, but oh, wait, you can just have Justice Williams step into that role if you want him to and if he proves himself in 2026. And it just again, speaks to so much depth on this team.
Yeah, I know Mari's going to be gone after the season. I know he's not playing the exact same position, but you're talking about a gap in that room. And as you were saying that, could you pick one freshman that has proven that they can be a starter next season, not named Denzel, or just even a young guy, just any of the young guys?
At receiver?
Yeah.
I'd say Chris Lawson and Raiden Vinesbright, certainly. And then the way Desmond Roebuck is making plays, I'm just never going to count him out of anything.
I agree with that, but it's all in practice. We haven't seen anything in a game. And I think that's what I'm more or less. There's nobody that look at in that room next season and say, oh, that's going to be the guy. There's so many guys that have the potential because Chris Lawson and Raiden Vinesbright, absolutely, Raiden made a couple plays today. Chris Lawson, obviously the agenda is still strong, but, still waiting for him to, fully get back in the mix. But again, when we talk about 2026, those guys are absolutely, going to be, in that competition. And it's such a healthy competition. Just imagine what a whole year of DeMond starting is going to do for those guys, where he's going to say, I already know where the ball is going to go. You guys have to show up and get to the, run the right route and things like, when Desmond's getting behind the sticks and some guys aren't. That's where you're talking about, can those guys make that jump? Because I think Justice is a guy that truly was not robbed of it, but had he been able to, just practice and be able to be a little more available than he was last season, I think he would be much further ahead, maybe even further than Audric Harris, who played in 7 games, just because of that size, the ability, what we've seen, in practice. It's all there, but until we truly see it on game day for, even a month, it's hard to say, anybody's truly the guy.
I think you made a fantastic point there. I know there are just several other players we want to talk about, so I want to switch sides of the ball here because you talk about making the jump. I think one guy really made a nice jump in Thursday's practice, and that's Dylan Robinson, where, again, go check out our YouTube and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts and or on social media, because we posted a little clip of John Richardson talking about Dylan Robinson and what he's done and how he's grown since he got here back in June. And I think we saw him have his best practice today, partially because, he had his first interception where he was stepping in on the first team for Tacario Davis and stepped in front of a Demond Williams pass that was intended for Rashid Williams and made a nice play on the ball along the sideline and cramped up immediately after, as Richardson told us. But I think it's one of those things where, as John Richardson said, and I wanted to expand on, he was mainly playing wide receiver in high school. So there's still so much that he's learning about playing defensive back. And I always love that wide receiver background. I know it's something that, people in the media have been talking about since Richard Sherman came up. And it's, oh yeah, he understands the route tree because he played the position for so long and different things like that. And I think those things are going to help Dylan at the end of the day. But you just look at the size, the physicality, the athleticism. We've seen him get beat a fair amount, I would say, for a freshman that's still learning the position over the first couple of weeks of fall camp. But as he continues to grow, I feel like every single day there are just 1 or 2 plays from him where it's, oh, okay, yeah, he's starting to pick that up. Oh, he's starting to pick up, this technique, or pick up just how to play when a receiver is going to run this route and he's supposed to be in man or he's supposed to be in this kind of coverage. And I'm really excited about what the future holds for him in particular, because as we saw today, this coaching staff is so confident in him that even though he's not, fully ingrained in all this and has only fully played the position for a couple of weeks, he's probably going to be the guy that gets called on if there's an injury or two.
And it's funny because when I looked across the field, I'm like, wait, isn't that Tacario? That's not Tacario. Is it? and truly, I had to kind of I was like, hey, that was Dylan, right? That had that, not Tacario. I'm just making sure. Even though we already knew Tacario, we noticed he wasn't, out there practicing. It's still, you had to do a double take just because everything physically checks out. It's just a matter of, can he soak up the playbook, and why we will continue to harp on Ryan Walters and John Richardson and that pairing just being perfect for this group, where you bring in a 4-star cornerback, top 200 for sure, maybe top 150 in the class of 2025. A guy that probably in any other year would be at least in the mix to compete for playing time this year if you didn't have Tacario or Ephesians, where even today he held, not consistently, but enough he held his own. And I think that's a sign where you can say, and again, I'm glad you added the context of it's only basically his first month playing this position consistently. And he's already at that level. Just wait till another probably 6, 7, 8 months when he has probably 4+ games at this point. That will be when I want to see, like, how much growth did he have? Because the amount of growth that I think he can have is almost like a guaranteed day one starter in 26.
So I like where you're going with that, and that's kind of why I wanted to make sure we highlighted Rylon Dillard-Allen, who had a really nice TFL. I believe it was on a screenplay. I kind of missed that part in my notes, but he's just somebody who John Richardson highlighted him after practice as well, and just talked about his physicality. He's the kind of guy where I just look at the safety room and how everything is going to play out this season and beyond. And he is someone who is just going to be such a critical building block of everything Ryan Walters and John Richardson and Taylor Mays are trying to do on the back end of this defense. And I feel like it's something we've seen it a lot in the recruiting world of, oh, why is Washington taking 5 or 6 defensive backs? When I think you and I have had some questions about the depth at corner right now, where, you know, we just talked about a guy who's been playing the position full time for just a couple of months at the very longest, stepping in if Tacario Davis or if Easton's Brysock and someone else might go down. Like, people have been asking, oh, hey, why are there so many defensive backs that you're taking in the 26 class? And I think Rylon Dillard-Allen kind of shows why, because this coaching staff is really good at evaluating that position, but B, the physicality and everything he brings when Ryan Walters is going to be rolling out so many nickel packages and so many different things like that, having guys who can come downhill and hit the way he does, it doesn't matter what conference you're playing in. That's going to play.
In a way, almost makes me think of Leroy Bryant, where when he had that spin move that Jedd gave him the forced fumble and Ty ended up running it in during the scrimmage. It's moves like that where he made that spin move like it was nothing, kind of like a John Jones elbow. And to me, that's like Leroy kind of got burned against Penn State a couple other times last season, and to see that growth in him, and again, a very quiet kid, but just goes about his business. And I think those are the type of guys that, when you look back at some of those death row days, it was like, yeah, it was always the quiet menacing dudes that ended up being probably some of the better guys, not named Marcus Peters, obviously. So
last thing I've got to ask, do you have any special teams thoughts? Because we saw some impressive long-range field goals at the end of practice.
I was going to say, because Ethan had what, a 53-yarder somewhere in that
ballpark? Ethan Moczulski had a 58, 59-yarder somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah.
And then Grady Gross had one too.
Again, and that's the thing. Grady's obviously improved. I think we've seen that throughout fall camp. He's been pretty consistent, but I think that's what I'm curious to see is where does Ethan factor into this? Because he's clearly got the leg, and we saw it on kickoffs too, where he put him right through the end zone, and it was like, okay, Ethan should handle kickoffs, Grady should handle kicks, and then if Grady starts struggling, then you go to Ethan and both. That's pretty much
so I don't think that's the whole story here. Where Grady has certainly improved in terms of strength, but I think it's one of those things. We saw Ethan nail a 59-yarder for Illinois last season. I think it's one of those things where, we saw Cam Little do it in the preseason with the Jacksonville Jaguars, where he kicked a 70-yarder. We're not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's such a weapon at the end of the half, where all of a sudden, instead of, we need to, get to the 35-yard line to have a shot. With a guy like Ethan, it's no, if we can line up 58, 59 and, we take a kickoff and run it back to the 30, let's just say it's 30-yard line. Couple of first downs, and all of a sudden you're kind of on the edge of field goal range. Something like that can be a real overlooked weapon. And I think that was part of the plan of adding a guy like Ethan to the mix. But Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout fall camp. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, we're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click that little bell, so you know when we post a new video. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Monday.